President Trump says he's ordered the deployment of 2 U.S. nuclear submarines to the appropriate regions in response to threats from the former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev.
The move came after a wave of provocative rhetoric from Dmitry Medvedev, former Russian president and now one of the most aggressive voices in Moscow's political machine. He accused President Trump of playing a dangerous game, threatening Russia with ultimatums over Ukraine. But this time, Washington didn't respond with press releases or diplomacy. Instead, the world learned that 2 of the most powerful war machines ever built were on the move, ordered into position in the appropriate regions. Submarines that could be anywhere, unseen, unheard, but fully armed. Trump didn't say whether they were nuclear-powered or nuclear-armed. He didn't have to. The message was clear. I'm not bluffing. It's a reminder that behind every headline about peace talks or tariffs, the machinery of war never stops. And in this case, the U.S. president is signaling he's done waiting. A new deadline is on the table. Russia has until August 8th to agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine or face crushing economic retaliation. So why now? What did Medvedev say that crossed the line? And what does this bold move tell us about where U.S.-Russia relations are really headed? This isn't just about submarines. It's about pressure, military, economic, psychological, being applied in a calculated way. It's a warning to Moscow and a test for the world. Stay with us, because what happens next could shift the balance of power far beyond Ukraine. Background context. Since early 2022, the war in Ukraine has reshaped global politics. What began as a sudden full-scale Russian invasion quickly turned into a drawn-out conflict that has devastated cities, displaced millions, and strained international alliances. Russia, under President Vladimir Putin, expected a swift victory. But Ukraine's fierce resistance, backed by billions in Western aid and weapons, changed the game. For the United States, this war has tested both patience and policy. Sanctions were imposed on Moscow. Billions were sent to Kyiv. NATO was re-energized. Yet, as the months turned into years, frustration grew on all sides. Washington wants the war to end, but without handing victory to Putin. Enter Donald Trump. Since returning to the Oval Office, Trump has made clear he wants to rewrite the U.S. role in this war. He's promised to end it quickly, a bold claim that's alarmed some and energized others. Critics say he's too soft on Russia. Supporters argue he's a deal-maker who can succeed where others failed. Trump's past with Russia is complicated. During his first term, he was often accused of being overly friendly with Putin, despite sanctions and military aid to Ukraine. Now, in his second term, the tone has shifted. Trump has grown more critical, publicly questioning whether Putin truly wants peace. This week, Trump set a new deadline. Russia must reach a peace deal with Ukraine by August 8th, or face sweeping tariffs on its oil and other exports. It's a high-stakes move, backed not just by words, but by action. 2 U.S. nuclear submarines have reportedly been repositioned as a show of force, and in the middle of it all is a statement by Dmitry Medvedev, former Russian president and close Putin ally, who accused Trump of playing the ultimatum game. What was once a distant war in Eastern Europe is now pulling the world's largest nuclear powers closer to direct confrontation. The situation is volatile. The decisions made in the next few days could shape the future of diplomacy or conflict. And the question remains, is this brinkmanship or the beginning of something even more serious? The trigger, Medvedev's comments. The latest escalation didn't begin with missiles or military exercises. It started with a post online. Dmitry Medvedev, former Russian president and now a key member of Putin's inner circle, took to social media to accuse Donald Trump of playing the ultimatum game. He was responding to Trump's new threat that Russia must agree to a peace deal with Ukraine by August 8th or face severe economic consequences. Medvedev's message wasn't long, but it was sharp, and it landed with impact. For observers who followed Russian politics closely, Medvedev's tone didn't come as a surprise. In recent years, he has shifted from a more moderate political figure to one of the most aggressive voices in Russian leadership. Once viewed in the West as a potential reformer during his time as president, he's now known for hardline rhetoric, nuclear threats, and open hostility toward the U.S. and its allies. His online posts often veer into the extreme, suggesting military responses, questioning the legitimacy of Western leaders, and painting the Ukraine war as a larger battle against Western domination. So when he targeted Trump directly, it was more than a passing remark. It was a provocation. Trump, never one to back away from confrontation, responded not with words alone, but with a calculated move, ordering 2 U.S. nuclear submarines to be repositioned to what officials called appropriate regions. Whether they are nuclear-powered or nuclear-armed has not been confirmed. But the message is clear. This wasn't just symbolic. It was meant to show resolve. From Trump's perspective, ignoring Medvedev's jab might have signaled weakness. Responding strongly, on the other hand, shows that he's not bluffing when he sets deadlines. It also reinforces his image, both domestically and abroad, as someone who makes bold decisions under pressure. But to critics, it raises another concern. When powerful nations escalate over social media posts and public statements, how close are we to turning political gamesmanship into real-world consequences? The trigger may have been a few sentences typed on a screen, but the ripple effects are global. The deadline. In an unexpected escalation, former President Donald Trump, now serving his second term, has issued a stark ultimatum to the Kremlin. He warned that Russia must agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine by Friday, August 8th. If not, the United States will impose a fresh wave of severe tariffs targeting Russian oil and key exports. The message was clear: peace or economic punishment. This new deadline marks a significant shift in tone. While Trump has historically presented himself as someone who can get along with Putin, his recent posture suggests increasing frustration with Moscow's unwillingness to wind down the conflict in Ukraine. This shift was likely fueled by what Trump called highly provocative remarks from former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, remarks that accused Trump of bluffing and threatening Russia without the will to act. But how serious is this deadline, and can it be enforced? Legally and logistically, the White House can impose tariffs without congressional approval, especially under emergency national security powers. Economically, the U.S. targeting Russian oil would add another layer of pressure on an already sanctioned economy, possibly pushing global energy markets into greater volatility. Yet critics say the effectiveness of such a move depends heavily on cooperation from European and Asian allies, many of whom remain dependent on Russian energy. Politically, this is a bold gamble. Trump is staking his credibility on forcing a ceasefire through economic leverage. But if August 8th comes and goes with no agreement and no follow-through, the threat risks being seen as empty rhetoric. Ultimately, this isn't just about tariffs. It's about signaling. Trump is trying to reassert American influence and leadership in a war that has dragged on for over 3 years. Whether this hard deadline will lead to diplomacy or further escalation remains to be seen. But one thing is clear: the countdown has begun. Russian reaction. The Kremlin wasted no time in delivering its official response, calm on the surface but unmistakably firm. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov addressed the growing tension by drawing a clear line. In Russia, only President Vladimir Putin determines foreign policy. This statement, delivered with trademark Russian composure, served both as a reassurance to international observers and a quiet rebuke of Dmitry Medvedev's recent inflammatory remarks. Medvedev, once seen as a moderate, has in recent years morphed into one of the most hawkish voices in Russian politics, particularly online. His now infamous post accusing Trump of playing the ultimatum game sparked global headlines. But just as quickly, Medvedev disappeared from the conversation. Since that statement, he has gone silent on X, formerly Twitter, offering no further comment, clarification, or provocation. His abrupt absence has raised eyebrows, suggesting either internal discipline or strategic silence ordered from higher up. Meanwhile, Moscow is downplaying Trump's show of military strength. The announcement that 2 U.S. nuclear submarines had been repositioned was met with measured, almost dismissive tone by Russian officials. No direct retaliation. No panic. The message was clear. Russia isn't flinching, at least not publicly. Behind closed doors, however, things may be different. Russian state media has toned down its usual bluster, and analysts believe the Kremlin is watching the situation closely. Trump's rhetoric may not be triggering immediate response, but it's testing Moscow's patience and putting new pressure on Putin to respond with restraint or escalation. For now, the official line remains steady. Putin is in control. Medvedev is quiet. And Trump's nuclear posturing? Not worth a public reaction, yet. But beneath that silence, the geopolitical chessboard is shifting, and both sides know it. Global reactions and risk analysis. The United States' decision to reposition 2 nuclear submarines as a warning to Russia hasn't gone unnoticed, especially by its allies in NATO and the broader international community. While Washington hasn't confirmed whether the submarines are armed or merely nuclear-powered, the symbolism of the move is unmistakable. It signals that the U.S. is prepared to respond to threats not only diplomatically, but militarily if necessary. And that message is reverberating across the globe. NATO response. Within NATO, reactions have been cautious but serious. Several European allies have privately expressed support for Trump's strong stance, viewing it as a potential deterrent against further Russian aggression. However, there is also concern about the unpredictability of such high-stakes maneuvers. A senior NATO diplomat, speaking anonymously, said, "We understand the need to project strength, but nuclear posturing carries risks, especially when the opponent is someone like Putin." Publicly, NATO has reaffirmed its commitment to de-escalation and dialogue, emphasizing that all members are united in protecting European security. Germany and France have both called for cooler heads to prevail, while the UK has quietly increased its own naval surveillance in the North Atlantic. A subtle but telling gesture. European analysts weigh in. Military analysts across Europe and North America are divided. Some view the submarine deployment as routine saber rattling, a signal meant more for domestic audiences than the Kremlin. Others see it as a serious escalation that reflects how dangerously high tensions have risen. The presence of nuclear submarines in contested waters changes the stakes, said Dr. Elise Renaud, a defense policy expert based in Brussels. It's not just about diplomacy anymore, it's about readiness. And readiness, in this context, walks a fine line between deterrence and provocation. American analysts echo that sentiment. While they note that U.S. submarines are often quietly moved around the globe, announcing such movements publicly is rare and deliberate. "This wasn't a leak, it was a message," said retired Admiral James Kirkpatrick, and messages like that are never sent lightly. Public anxiety grows. Meanwhile, public concern is growing. In Europe, particularly in countries bordering Russia or Ukraine, people worry that even symbolic moves like this could trigger unintended consequences. With memories of the Cold War still fresh for many older citizens, the idea of nuclear assets being positioned in response to political rhetoric is deeply unsettling. In the U.S., too, social media is filled with questions. Is this brinkmanship or genuine preparation? Is peace further away than it seemed a week ago? And what happens if Russia responds in kind? So far, there's no evidence of Russia escalating militarily in response, but that could change quickly. Submarines may move in silence, but their message is loud. In a world already strained by war, economic instability, and political division, the deployment of nuclear submarines, even as a warning, reminds us just how fragile global peace can be. Final reflection. The image of 2 U.S. nuclear submarines quietly moving into position sends a powerful message, one that echoes far beyond the waters they now patrol. For some, this is Trump doing what he's always promised, playing hardball, projecting strength, and refusing to back down in the face of threats. For others, it's a dangerous escalation, the kind of high-stakes posturing that can spiral into unintended consequences. The question remains, is this tough diplomacy or a gamble? Dmitry Medvedev's provocative remarks may have triggered this response, but the roots of the tension run deeper. The war in Ukraine grinds on into its 3rd year. Peace talks remain elusive, and distrust between global powers has only intensified. Against that backdrop, even symbolic moves, like submarine deployments, take on heightened meaning. Trump's decision to announce a firm deadline for a Russian ceasefire, paired with the threat of severe economic penalties, introduces a new level of urgency. But deadlines are only as powerful as the willingness to enforce them. Will Russia take the warning seriously? Will the international community back Trump's position or view it as unilateral brinkmanship? So far, the Kremlin is dismissive. Medvedev has gone quiet. And Putin, as ever, remains the ultimate decision-maker in Moscow. But behind the scenes, tensions are simmering. European allies are on alert. Military analysts are parsing each word, each move, and the world watches, waiting to see what happens next. This moment isn't just about Trump or Russia. It's about how power is wielded in a world where diplomacy and danger often go hand in hand. It's about the delicate balance between showing strength and sparking conflict. The clock is ticking. August 8th may be more than just a deadline. It could mark a turning point in global peace or global pressure. If you want to stay updated on what happens next, make sure to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. This story is just beginning.